welcome to the GPU Audio Innovation Lounge podcast. We've been away for a while, but we're back and have a great guest today, Mr. Toa Dunn. And joining me is our PR and content manager, Chris. Chris, how are you doing today?
Yeah, very well, thank you.
Awesome. Any updates from your side, Chris, on the with GPU Audio?
Yeah, we have a couple. So we have Vienna Symphonic Library. Our first partner release will be out very, very soon, MIR Pro 3D. It's a multi-impulse response plugin and will be the first GPU-powered plugin on the scene. So we're really excited about that. That will be coming in the next couple of months. We also have the plugin suite coming to Apple Mac very, very soon. So we have the container plugins that everyone's familiar with on PC. They will be coming to Mac very, very soon.
Yeah, we're super excited. I know the dev team is working super hard in getting this all together. So we're really excited to unleash this GPU power to the world. So Toa, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Excited about it.
So for people that don't know you, can you tell us a bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, so I spent nearly the past 10 years or so, former head of kind of Riot Games music. So if you're familiar with League of Legends, Valorant, as well as kind of esports, and Arcane, actually, our Netflix series, right? So I've been there I'd been there for about 10 years and really building up what became Riot Games music, which is kind of, what could music be within the video game industry? Less about making just video game music, but like really focused on creating impactful moments and leaning into music from like a cultural standpoint too. And so, yeah, I had a really good run over there. And now I'm spending a lot of my time kind of advising and consulting on that connection between music, artists and partnerships and in the gaming and tech industry itself. So really trying to find ways to create value in that space.
That's cool. Yeah. So there's probably some listeners of this podcast that are new to the idea of virtual music experiences. And I know that's something that you help build for Riot. Can you share some of your thoughts on the potential of this space and including maybe some opportunities for artists and creators that maybe they haven't thought of before?
Yeah, I think it's a really big opportunity, especially now, right? A lot of things that I've been talking about recently is kind of, I think when you look across many domains, whether it's, the video game industry, whether it's music, whether it's, just tech in general and entertainment, a lot of those domains, they don't know what they look like in the next 5 to 10 years, right? So everybody's looking for the next platform, the next product, right? And you have all this new bustling technology that's coming, right? That's and been here, even everything from whether it's blockchain technology to AI and whatnot. And so tech is starting to like catch up with some of our ambitions, I would say. And so the real big opportunity is as you look at gaming, right? I've always said you can't look at the gaming industry as just like a video game, right? The video game industry is kind of like new era digital entertainment, right? Like right now we're seeing IPs that derived from video games now are starting to be the thing, right? We saw that with comics and Marvel. And now you're seeing this with video games, whether it was Super Mario, right? The Last of Us, we had Arcane 2 years ago. And then esports as well, right? Like on just how big esports is, especially in certain regions across the world. And so the opportunity becomes, it's less of how do you get a song in a video game, but it's like, how can I be a part of this culture, right? Whether it's the competitive culture of esports, whether it's the entertainment itself, and what are new ways to kind of integrate into that. And for many artists, some of them actually play games, right? So they're kind of authentically in there. I know I was someone who, I don't think I grew up calling myself a gamer, right? I didn't grow up with like a big PC and was playing a lot of those games. But I did play Street Fighter a lot, right? I did play NBA 2K a lot, and I played all these console games and PlayStation and whatnot. But I guess what I thought what a gamer was, I didn't identify as that. And so now you're seeing kind of this where a lot of us played some sort of game and can identify with it. And so I'm actually just really excited about that opportunity of how can you bring in kind of culture and impact within video games and music and just even tech in general and whatnot. So I think we're going to see a big uptick, just kind of in innovation and opportunities in the space.
That's cool. And if I'm correct, you are a musician as well, right? You have a music background.
I, I almost I almost don't like calling myself a musician just
Okay.
because I've been surrounded by some incredible musicians. So out of respect for the craft, but yeah, I grew up, classically trained. I played the saxophone at an early age. I fell in love with jazz. Right, I think around junior high, I was playing with a jazz band, and then all the way up through, I went to USC, so I'm a hardcore Trojan, right,
Oh,
out of
nice.
heart. So go fight on. Um, but it was at USC where, and actually in high school, where I also started kind of DJing and getting into music production itself, right? Kind of, as digital music production became accessible, just production altogether became more accessible. And so, yeah, I spent a lot of my passion and time in music.
Cool. Yeah, I'm a musician myself. That's my background, and I'm sure a lot of people that listen to this podcast are musicians, producers, etc. So I think it would be really cool to learn what goes on in the early stages of planning music for a game. I mean, maybe you can share a few thoughts about that. What are the conversations that your teams had, or sound designers, that sort of thing. What are you talking about when you're planning the music experience?
Yeah, and a lot of that comes down to the game itself, right? So in video games, it's such a diverse, right? There's so many different genres, and so music can have a different role, right? Like the difference can be everything from, take a really competitive game like League of Legends, for example, right? It's very similar to, let's say, how you almost would experience playing a sport, right? So if you play basketball, if you go to a live basketball game, there's music, but it's usually in between things happening. As soon as the game starts, music goes away, right? Because the players and the fans need to kind of hear what's going on. It's part of the experience, and even the players need to hear things like, oh, the sneakers were kind of behind me, I know where that person is. It's a part of playing the game. So when you're playing a competitive video game as well, that's also important. There's sonic sounds that help indicate what's going on in the game, and so you can't have music in the way of that. So it's pretty common in probably competitive games where people will mute the music, right, because they don't want it to get in the way. Then you can put it into you can look at a whole different game and genre, like a narrative driven video game, where the music
Right.
really drives and evokes the emotion of what's currently happening. Like they want suspense. You hear those violins, right? The strings come in and everything. And so all that has to be thought about as part of what is the game experience itself, to help understand what is music's role in that video game. And that will indicate just like what exactly you're doing, right? Because you can't always just put this front of house type song or out front when they need something else during while playing the game itself. So a lot of that has to be thought about before diving into it. And that's going to indicate, even just, are we working, is it a composer who's coming in and we're just thinking of laying more background orchestral music? Like what type of genres fit for this type
Mhm.
of experience, right? What is the feel, right? There's kind of the tone and feel of the game. Is it more modern production? Or is it, very high fantasy? Is it orchestral?
Mhm.
Or do we want to go stylistic, right? There's kind of the very topical directional conversations at first, right? Just trying to figure out what is this and where
Yeah.
we're going with it. If that
I
makes
always
sense.
thought it was cool, games like San Andreas and all
Hmm.
that. When you hear just a different, lots of different styles of music, I think that
Hmm.
opens the doors, for lots of genres that some people may not have thought about. I like metal now, or I like hip hop now, or so yeah, I think it's just a great opportunity, for just the music industry to grow through this whole space.
Yeah, I think that's where you can get creative, right? Because you can only do so many games that look and sound the same and
Hmm.
expect them, right? It's then can you get creative of like, oh, it would be very obvious to put orchestral music here, but can you still hit the tone, but with like a different take, a fresher take, almost a somewhat of a different genre? And that's where you potentially have some creative liberties, and that to me is really interesting.
Yeah.
I'm really big on, it's like, how can we create something that's just, unique and special, right? And that's what
Mhm.
you won't always be able to do that, because again, it just really depends on the role of music in the experience itself.
So yeah, just off the back of that, really, yeah, how do you use audio in games to create meaningful experiences for the user? And yeah, how would you define a meaningful experience?
That's a great question. So meaningful experiences, I think it can depend on the game, right? Again, I think story driven, like narrative driven games have really interesting opportunities for creating kind of like those story moments where it can be very emotional, it can be very dramatic or not. Um, and so those become opportunities. Like, are you telling a very pinnacle, like, is this something that's going to be meaningful in the story? And can you help it feel meaningful? Right. Versus I think in like a competitive game, we weren't able to create as many, like, because the music wasn't as present in the competitive game, but the experience of esports, at least for us at Riot, right, where it was kind of, we had the fans who were watching and viewing this game, and what we wanted to bring was how do we bring that air to esports, right? So this was early on. This was early 2000s, 13, 14. We were really trying to figure out how do we put esports on the map, because we were deciding to invest in esports in a big way. And we looked at things like the Olympics, right? And in the NFL, right, you have the Super Bowl, right? The halftime show, right? Like what that brought to the experience of the game. And so we wanted to create a meaningful moment of like, yes, I was there 2014 at that moment. Like these two teams came together. They were the best two in the world. And we looked, and some of us looked at it from the music standpoint. So we created this anthem, right? And this is 2014 that I'm talking about. And we worked with Imagine Dragons, right? And back then I think they were more known as kind of like the Radioactive guys by like kind of mainstream, because they had that one big song. But they played League of Legends. And that's how we grew that relationship with them. So we were able to kind of craft this song with them that was very anthemic to kind of be the anthem for that World Finals game. And then they came and they performed live in Seoul, Korea, right? And we had this big show. And that created a meaningful moment for that competition, for the people who were there to view that and experience that, right? So that's kind of like an example of a meaningful moment that actually wasn't in the game itself, but was
Mm.
kind of around the experience of the game. But I think you can get in-game moments too when you just watch. I mean, it becomes almost close to like film and TV, right? When something happens, and I guess I'd reference something like if you did watch Arcane, for example, and I don't want to give any spoilers, but if you get to, episode 3 towards the end, and like there's a really big moment that happens there that most people walked away impacted, I guess you could say, right? So music and storytelling really, I think, leaned in there to help evoke that emotion. So I guess that's what I mean by meaningful moments, and the way I've always viewed it is, it's like the motion of, I'm sorry, it's like the movement of emotion, right? If everything is just happy, then it's just happy, right? But it's sometimes when if you ever watch something and you're like happy, and then all of a sudden it just jerks you and you realize how bad things are. It's that movement that I believe creates in us as humans kind of like almost like meaning to it.
Are there any audio techniques that a gamer wouldn't really know that you're doing, but that you're doing to, yeah, help illustrate these moments, or like?
Because League of Legends, like for League, we were for the first almost 10 years, I guess, about 10 years, we just had League of Legends, right? So there was this kind of common joke. We should have just been called League of Legends or Riot Game, even instead of Riot Games, because that's all we had at the moment. We were hyper focused on that, right? So due to the nature of the game, like there's only so much that we could do, I guess you could say, but there was definitely stuff that was done. And so, for example, you, you want to kind of have, if something is happening in the game in a certain area, you do want to be able to understand where that is coming from to an extent, right? That's kind of a readability mechanic, right? If you hear, a, a gun from somewhere, you want to know where it's coming from. It gives you an idea, right, of kind of your positioning and how the game is being played. So there's definitely things like that were being done, and even music was utilizing some of that of mood, where there was kind of a rhythm to the game, right? You can think of it as like there's the early game where it's kind of warming up and things are kind of happening. It's not super spicy yet, right? Then there's kind of mid game where probably the action kind of really picks up, and so there was this natural rhythm to the game, and so the music did help emphasize some of that. Like you could almost feel at what part of the game you're on based on how the music was changing to an extent. So there was some of that, but there wasn't as much of an opportunity as there may be in other genres to really think about spatial audio and the experience. I think a lot of the things that probably many of us are really excited about now that technology is really evolving,
Mhm.
and you think about immersion into an experience, right? Like I go straight to places like, man, if I'm in a story, like, in the story versus just watching it from afar, but I feel immersed. And, you could use the example of if it's a suspenseful moment, right? And the sound is here, but then it's over there or something, and you don't know what that is. Like that adds to the immersion, right? I'm probably a little bit more scared because you want me to feel like I don't know what's going on, and I don't, because the audio is matching that to an extent, right? And so I anticipate seeing more of that because I think in the video game industry, like video games, they thrive on innovation because, like I mentioned before, nobody wants to play the same game. If the game already exists and they've played it, you can't come out with the same game. You have to create a new game for it to be fun, right? And so I think these kind of immersive experiences that are starting to kind of probably evolve out of what people think of the traditional game experience, and it becomes, you know, digital experiences, so to speak, and you can do storytelling in really compelling ways. I think that's when you're really going to see audio really kick in and add to that mechanic, right? Like I've always been a big believer that, music and audio is this like soft spoken secret that only so many people really understand how to truly use and understand the impact music can have for almost any other medium, right? I used to tell people like, I remember, I was in college and I think a friend brought over, I forgot, like not Children of the Corn, but some movie, but it was a bootleg and it didn't have the audio soundtrack. And it was the weirdest experience to watch something that was supposed to scare you, but you didn't even know to be scared, right? Something would
Yeah.
just jump out and it was almost kind of funny. You're like, oh, that's weird, right? And so,
Yeah.
yeah, I know, Bill, you probably, it sounds like you want to say
Well,
something
yeah,
to
I
him.
mean,
But
I just remember I went to school for audio, right? I studied
Mhm.
recording and sound music production and stuff like that. And I just remember one of the professors said one day, it was like, video or like film without sound music is surveillance. And
Mhm.
there's all these videos online of like, when they change the music for like a horror movie or something like that. Like I saw a video, it was like the 28 Days Later, and they put the Benny Hill soundtrack or the Benny
Mhm.
Hill theme song in there, and it changes everything, right?
Yep.
And so I mean, this is well understood, but I think you're so right there. It's so important, it's so vital, and all the stuff you're saying about immersive audio and just kind of switching things up and keeping you guessing with new sounds that are you ahead of you, below you, above you. I mean, that's all very, very possible right now. And the technology is, I think, at a point right now where people are totally accepting it. Like we were at the NAM show, GPU Audio was at the NAM show, and everybody was talking about immersive and spatial. That was like the hot topic, Atmos, et cetera. So,
Mhm.
I think it's just widely accepted. And, labels are asking for remixes and Atmos and all that. So I think we're finally at a point where, everyday users and producers are going to be thinking immersive, right? Whether they're doing
Mhm.
sound design for a game or a film or making a beat, they're thinking immersive and spatial.
Yeah. One thing I know this was something like we had looked at too is, you know, often been asked like why haven't a lot of games taken advantage of just even what's been available, right, with like audio. And I know one of the hurdles, and I think we'll progress through it, is it actually comes down to the player, the consumer, the user.
Mhm.
Most gamers are either using these really cheap speakers that came with their computer, right? Or maybe they upped them, right? Spent a little and they sound nice. but they're stereo, and they may not have the greatest of placement. They probably don't, and they probably don't have great acoustics in their room, or wherever it's at, right? Or they have headphones, right? So a lot of times it's really been limited. Is like you could create this incredible audio experience, but the majority, like the big majority, would not actually be able to hear and experience that, right? And so I know that's kind of always been. So I think as not only the technology evolves, but as the products that utilize the technology on the consumer products, once those become more attainable or just adopted more, that's when I think you'll see the really big kick. Because we could easily be making these great spatial audio experiences, but hardly anybody is listening to that because they just don't have the ability. They don't have the product there, and they
Right.
don't know to have it. Right?
Kind of a side note. I don't know if both of you guys saw the Apple Vision Studio Pro like announcement video. Did you see that thing? I mean, I got like goosebumps watching that video when the dawn of spatial computing, and it's mind blowing. To think that this headset. I don't know all the technical specs and all that, but spatial audio on this. Having the screen overtake your room and your field of vision is intense, man. And I mean, I think if that's where we're headed in the next couple of years, I think that we're in for a wild ride, with technology and music and games and really all media.
Yeah, I think it kind of transforms, right? I think it's it's this good kind of mid ground where there's some excitement. VR's had kind of a tough time over these many years, right? Because the adoption of a headset fully and being fully just kind of plugged into something, but like not know what's actually going on around you has just been a big hurdle, and they're expensive. Whereas mixed reality is this kind of like in between where it's like, oh no, I don't have to fully leave my setting. If anything, it's like a lot of the virtual and tech comes to my world, and right, it emphasizes or enhances my current physical world in a really interesting way, right? And so yeah, I agree with what you're saying. Is like I think that's gonna really be the thing for the next few years, is whether gaming, whether professional work, just how we do things, I think is going to be altered in that way, because I think it is compelling, right? Like what does entertainment look like when, it's this mix of, you don't have to go to this virtual world, but you get to leverage the advantages of something that's virtual, but in your setting, right? Like, and my mind just starts to wander. Like you can bring something to your room, but then it visually changes in front of you, and then the audio can also interact with that, as far as like, oh, I sound like I'm on a beach, and I'm seeing what it would literally look like if my room where I'm sitting on my couch goes into the ocean. I'm going to watch a movie here, right? Like all those types
Yeah.
of weird ideas probably become very, very capable.
Yeah, I think they really went hard on the kind of having like a projector screen of your kind of documents and things with the Apple stuff. But yeah, I agree. Yeah, VR's had a tough time, and they've been talking about VR since like the mid '90s. So it's great to see it kind of implemented and going full steam ahead with Apple. And yeah, just in terms of like we've talked a little bit about immersive and touched on virtual reality there. Let's go over to AI. Like, how do you feel about the potential impact of AI for gaming, for audio, for music? How does what does the future look like to you?
I think, yeah, AI is really interesting because it's different than just AI's kind of exponential impact is almost hard to comprehend. I think even for many of us who have kind of an idea of like how big the impact is, I don't think we really do, right? Like everything, so many things could be faster, more efficient, potentially more effectively done because of something like this, right? Everything from, if you make something, this may help you make it faster. If you need to come up with ideas of something, this may help you curate faster. Like I used to say, even with the craftsman, this is, if you design characters, right? If you're a character designer, it's like you need to come up with a certain type of character. And maybe some of these people, what they would do is they would go research like a culture, like, okay, what is the ancient Romans, like what were they wearing this time? Because that's what this character, right? And they do all this research. And so maybe they do like 5 days of research just to curate visually and understand the culture and why things were made. And then they really spend 2 days drawing, right? Because they're just a master craftsman. So it's a lot of it's research so that they know what they're doing. And then they spend a few days actually drawing. But that becomes like a week because it's 5 days research, 2 days of work. What if that research is down to 10 minutes? What if you, right? And then you say, well, maybe I just use the rest of the week really on my craft. Or I still only need 2 days to do my craft. I now could do multiple, or like I can do a lot of these now, right? And still maintain my quality bar. Um, and right, so when you think of music production, how that could impact, right, how you make music or how fast things can happen. When you think of these digital worlds and digital assets when it comes to rendering, right, and things like problem solving, right? Analytic, like everything it could almost touch, it could help and enhance, right? And then there's of course the more dystopian views, like once it gets past just helping and assisting, but actually doing the things for us and potentially doing them better, right? And then, right, and that's a whole nother conversation, I think, right? Which is that's why probably some are saying, hey, be careful with it. But I think overall, it's, I guess you kind of look at it as it's almost kind of like a weapon, right? Like, let's say a knife. Let's just say a knife, right? A knife is not a bad thing. You butter your bread, right? You cut things that you need to cut. But put in the hands of the wrong people, a knife can be dangerous.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
makes so much sense. A common um, idea that I keep hearing in the industry is that AI solves the 0 to 1 problem, and I think one of the best examples of that in the music industry and music production is just a couple of weeks ago, Splice came out with a Create. It's in beta, but it's part of their sounds product. And man, it is so cool. Like you can just kind of scroll through and like stop on something like, I'm inspired right now. I love that synth arpeggio, right? The beat, that's great. I'm going to take that and I'm going to get started. So it's just you're cutting out like the waiting for inspiration or using something else to be inspired. You're just kind of in the zone right from the get go, and you can get started. So I mean, going back to your idea about the character designer, I think that's where to me AI is headed. For creatives, it's just being able to kickstart ideas, and we can generate more content.
Yeah. It's like the super assistant, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it can help you do things just faster and more effective, right? And assist you on the way. I think that's kind of how we're starting to see it evolve right now. And so yeah, I think AI's impact is just going to be really deep across everything, because everything's kind of digital, been going into the digital space, and that's where it can thrive.
Okay, I just want to follow up the knife analogy because it's a really good one. And yeah, when we were speaking to Ali Koretsky, or when he was speaking at the Innovation Lounge at NAM this year, he was talking about AI being a curation tool, as you've said. It's like it's something that can help us find things very quickly. It won't do all the work for us, but it can kind of put things together and show us things, which is exceptionally useful. I've noticed, Toa, you also discussing sort of ethical AI online recently, and I just thought, yeah, how do you imagine we're going to be able to create those ethical AI models? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, so I was part of a conversation where I think that was one of many topics that we're trying to cover in regards to kind of the impact of AI, right? So
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we didn't get super deep into like what is the actual solution, because I think it's more of that's the prompt right now of,
Mm-hmm.
you know, how do we go forward in this future and make sure that we're addressing the concerns that we're starting to see, right? And what does ethical AI really mean, especially in the world of creatives, right? People who create. And there's a lot of discussion around, you had some of these models where, I kind of think of it three sections: is you have like the data, then you have the model, and then you have the output to an extent, right? And so the data that's feeding these models, there was concerns of like, well, where is that data coming from? Because, you have, derivative work, potentially, right? Because the AI didn't create all the data out of nowhere. It was seeing, analyzing, ingesting from somewhere. And so how do you make sure that if that's what's happening, that there's kind of due credit or whatever needs to happen in that pass through, right? That you don't just have AI now learning from everybody and then replacing, and then you lose this kind of creatives no longer like see that value, right? Things can be creative off of their work without them, right? Whether it's approval or there's some sort of pass through, right, of revenue and things like that. And so there's all these things to really think about when it comes to AI. At least from my point of view, when I think about ethical AI, it's just more of how do we adopt AI in a way that doesn't destroy the kind of some of the key principles of how we function, both as a culture, society, and whatnot, right? Because I think when it comes down to it, is if you erase kind of the value for creatives, then nothing gets created, right? And we lose that. And I think that's what kind of the origins of copyright law, right? Is you still want to be able to prompt and incentivize creativity, things to be creative, and that's how tech and evolution and all that stuff comes, is because we're incentivized. But if AI could potentially come in the way and just de-incentivize everything because it just doesn't, and right, that becomes a potential issue. And so, yeah, there's been many discussions of how do we develop AI, and this is across all the different domains, right? Like whether it's copyright, it's art, visual, it's music, right? All these things. I think AI is forcing us to rethink how copyright is going to work, right? Because copyright came out before the even internet was out, right? And we've already seen issues of that, right? Like once the internet opened up, it was just like, whoa, how does these old copyright laws apply to it? Now put AI on it, right? And it feels like it's so far ahead of where the laws currently are, or just even how we should understand, how we should understand the capabilities of this. So
yeah, it's wild to think. I think if you're it's a good time to be a copyright lawyer. If that's your specialty and you're thinking about a young person's trying to decide what they want to go to school for, copyright law. I say this, I'm not an expert in this, but I do understand some of the basics in, blockchain tech. I kind of feel like that might be a solution where there's technology where it's all transparent. We trained our data on this, and you're seeing it. You're seeing that we trained our data on your copyrighted material. You just get an alert or something like that. Maybe that's a solution. Maybe somebody's already working on that. But yeah, I agree. I think that the problem, got to solve it, because artists, they're still going to create. I mean, it's not like people are going to stop buying acoustic guitars because of AI. People, music is an experience, it's communication, it's expression. We're always going to do it. But you do need that incentive, right? To make the great stuff, to go on tour, to do these things. You need that. You need income from your creative work.
Yep, exactly. And it's, to kind of add to that real quick, is the space is moving so fast. I think becomes one of the biggest hurdles, is it's evolving so fast. And it's like, how do we keep up with it? Right. Because you think you know what it is, and then it's already changed on you. Right. I think there was this thing where, like there was kind of these big cycles of evolution where it would happen. Even I think you could look at how long people keep their jobs. Like, back in the day, people used to get these gold watches. I think that was for like 20 years. You worked at a company because that was the relationship. You worked somewhere and you were there for 20 years. That's how you did it. And then that became 10 years. And then, like, I think you look at it nowadays and it's something like 3 years or something, right? There's this generation, we don't even know about the watch, right? There's like, that's a foreign concept. And so that's also how fast these like kind of evolutions happen, right? Like things used to happen every few decades, but now they happen almost every other year to an extent, right? On some of these. So things move fast.
Yeah, thank you so much for speaking to us today, Toa. What are you currently working on right now that you can talk about, and where can people find you online if they'd like to do so?
Yeah, so I spend a good amount of time on LinkedIn right now. I think there's a really interesting kind of community of folks that are really starting to gather around a lot of these different topics of just thinking about the future of, tech and music and gaming and things like that, just overall. So that's probably the best place. So, on LinkedIn, it's Toa Dunn. Also, I'm pretty active a little bit on Twitter to an extent too. I know a lot of people like to have conversations there, so you can find me there. And as far as what I'm doing, I mean, NDA on what I can speak on, right? Is I'm really just kind of advising and consulting on some of the folks who want to, whether it's on the music side and how do they participate more in gaming and tech, and then also on the kind of game side, it's really bridging that gap between, I guess, entertainment overall and tech to an extent, but emphasizing music, video games, the majority of the time. So yeah, I think, I guess I'll leave it with this is, I spent 10 years over at Riot, and I think the early years, everybody was scratching their head on what we were doing. I didn't even know how to define my title or what I was doing because it just didn't really exist. But I think you fast forward it to now, and a lot of people are highly interested in kind of doing a lot of what I've been working on for the past 10 years. So it's a really interesting scenario now to be in, is where a lot of people have questions. And so I'm just looking to kind of lend and add value where I can of my experience. So.
Okay, well, Toa, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation, and we kind of went into some different directions that, just really inspiring. I think that we're at this kind of cusp of something really beautiful, in my opinion, with creativity and media and technology. So, I'll definitely make sure to keep following you on LinkedIn, because I know you have some really great posts and some great ideas there. So thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always great to, I love these topics, so always willing to chat with you guys.